what you're describing is like a really pure form of, I think, the Montessori philosophy, which is that like the child themselves, like the child itself, it sounds like a machine. The child
The
has this
machine
mind.
children
Yeah, the
themselves.
the robot
Over.
children, their minds are these like learning machines. They engage with the world through learning. That's what they do. That's like the human way to engage with the world. And people who are amazed by that, I just say, well, I have two cats. I say, look at cats. They're way dumber than humans. And my cats explore my house completely. They know every single nook and cranny because they're curious. Curiosity killed the cat. Human beings are 1,000 times more curious and 1,000 times smarter than cats. But it's the same principle.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, thank you. Hey, nice. Vishal, all over it.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just quick go around, introduce ourselves, and then Michael, you brought us together, so maybe you could provide a little intro. I'm Joe WEquil, CEO, founder of WEquil Group, but I'm really here to talk about the school, WEquil School, started by my daughter Sume. She's 12, but she's been doing an incredible job of I think changing the way that certainly I think about how children can learn better. So that's me.
I'll go ahead. So I'm Vishal. I'm 24 years old from Panama. I've been involved with WEquil Group now for about, I think, around 2 months. So this is my introduction to the future of learning, future of education, and really excited about this field. So.
Yeah, Adam.
We'll go next.
Yeah.
My name's Adam Braus, and I am a higher educational innovator. Very interested in the possibilities of how starting new colleges can accelerate the future of higher education.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I connected the groups was definitely in talking to Joe and then talking to Adam, the approach of kind of reapproaching education from a secondary, primary to secondary, and then into post-secondary, the learning process and kind of unbundling it, project-based work is something where I think there's an alignment of you trying to think differently about how you can do this and how you can accomplish it. I think there's similar issues, Adam, that you've covered, is like, how do you enter that space? Is because some of our recent discussions have been around credentialing and recognition and kind of the barriers that students may face as they move through that. Again, if they jump and go from here to a job, does it matter? No. However, if they have to go through that credentialing process, if that's something that is important, some of the barriers and challenges that, Adam, you probably faced in the work that you've done or seen, and that I think we've talked about a bit.
Yeah.
And I think maybe all know my background. I'm higher education career side of things, kind of a systems person. I've moved away from the higher education environment, and now I'm working at a startup, 15-year-old startup, but but still a very small, nimble, agile kind of development type environment, very different than higher ed.
Cool.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for doing that. And I'll also give a shout out to Austin Smith. He's leading our credentials initiative. Jessica Browser is also leading our higher ed initiative. The two are looking to do a podcast with me and Michael here, because the two are so intertwined. Maybe to kick things off, I'll share a little bit about the challenge, but also the opportunity for how we're weaving that in with the school. So the school only became like a legal entity 6 months ago. So we're 2.5 years away from even being able to apply for any sort of accreditation. And when we were looking into different ways of approaching K through 12, one of the things that we saw was that you can't even get a GED or high school diploma until you're 17 in most states. 16 I think for some, and 18 for others. And so that was a challenge we were looking at. But as we were talking to more and more homeschoolers, and I'd say that not everybody at WEquil School is homeschooled, but it's the kids that are homeschooled that have a lot more flexibility to do what we're doing. Things like starting companies, like their own startups for kids. We've had about 5 of those. That we're really looking to see, well, is there anything else we can do here? And the homeschoolers were talking to us about how for a long time now, these homeschoolers would dual enroll and start getting college credits, and some of them would never even go and bother to get their high school diploma. And so that's when, as Sumi and I were talking through this initially, maybe 5 months ago, when we first brought up this issue, we're like, well, let's just start looking at ways to get into higher ed and using various platforms like Coursera and even like Google University and stuff to start to showcase getting higher ed credentials. And then that on top of also trying to create startups or selling books on Kindle and some of the stuff that the kids are doing where they're making money, getting higher ed credentials of some kind, and then using that as a way to just bypass K through 12 typical GED high school diploma stuff altogether. So that's where our head was at until just the past couple months, when we started to think, well, maybe there's some things that we can do in terms of credentials coming out of WEquil School itself. And so we're really approaching this across all angles. But that's kind of where my head's at and how I'm approaching this. But I'd very much like to hear more from you, Adam, about, long form, like all the things that you're doing. How do you see this differently than most people in the space? Like, what differentiates your philosophy? And maybe we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying sounds fantastic. I mean, from working, so I was the founding sort of designer of Make School and the lead. So as you know about Make School, we had really great outcomes. We had really good successes getting people jobs. We also we were the, I think, 4th college ever to go through the WASC incubator, or first college ever to go through the WASC incubation. Other colleges through other accreditors have tried to go through incubation, like Minerva famously. So we kind of followed that same route. But we were short money. Minerva had $25 million on day one to do their project. We raised more than that over the whole lifetime of the college, but it was like over 7 years, and we had terrible financial discipline. So and I'll just say that is not my fault. I was like being told to shut up when I was saying, hey, why do we have 7 full-time engineers when we have no revenue from our website? It's just a college. And I was told to just sort of shut up. So we could have, I think, made it if we had had more financial discipline. But yeah, bad leadership and bad discipline from the kind of founder level, unfortunately. But the founders were like 19 when they started the college. So I don't know, what do you expect? It's hard to start a college when you're 19 years old. But we did have a lot of success with outcomes and with programs and teaching and stuff. So, but now we were taken over by Dominican, who was our incubating college. When we ran into some financial difficulties, the contract stated that the incubator could like take us over for free. So they just took us over. So they just like walked across the street and were like, pick that up and put it in their pocket. And so now we're in Dominican University. And the program's the same, but inside Dominican University. But I guess from all of that, I really realized that exactly like you said, like it's far more devastating to existing colleges for something outside of colleges to happen that is better than them than it is to try to like go inside their system and like basically scrape and bow and like constantly beg for scraps from the table from this like decadent, stupid system that just doesn't work for almost anyone except for like rich tenure track professors who are all like baby boomers,
Yeah, so, but how do you really feel about that?
Yeah. I'm a renegade. Yeah, I have revolutionary fervor in my heart. It's true. But yeah, so I think it's far more devastating to build something truly excellent outside of it. So exactly what you're saying is super exciting to me. Like we need to like, it's like a glass ceiling as thick as like a, thick as ice, like 5 inches thick, and we need to go like right through it with something really strong. We can't just go and try to work inside the system. It doesn't work, and history bears that out as well. So for example, trying to get women to be accepted into college was the only reason that ever happened in America, and was because they started women's colleges, and the women's colleges were doing better than the men's colleges because the women were more diligent, worked harder, studied more, were easily as smart, right? And so then Smith College and Vassar and these women's colleges, Bryn Mawr, started, and that, because they were doing so well, it put all the other colleges to shame, first of all, because the women were doing better than the men, and it showed them that there's 50% of the marketplace they weren't even using. So that's the only reason women were ever accepted to college in America, was because alternatives totally outside of the system started. And that's throughout the history. Same thing, black colleges, the historically black colleges. That's the reason people were like, oh, we could accept black, people of color into colleges. So throughout the history of higher education, it's always been that colleges and universities are retrogressive. They're conservative to the point of retrogressive. They're so traditional that the only thing that can ever get them to move is something devastating coming from the outside. So.
Well, that's powerful. I don't know as much about the history of colleges. I know more about the history of K through 12 education, although all that stuff I started to pick up really over the past 6 months. This is just my daughter's like pet project, Her Homeschool, because at the time I was working full time at the FDIC. My wife works full time at the Commodity Future Trading Commission. We had no way of really spending a lot of time trying to teach them, and so Sume got together with her friends and was like, "Well, how are we going to basically drive our own education?" So it ended up becoming this this experiment in kids teaching kids, and so it was working, and then it started to get a lot of attention because of her Flutter class. So she was teaching kids how to build apps.
Nice.
And then one of the demo days that we did was a bunch of kids launching their own apps, right? One of them was so my daughter Isla, she has a startup called Blend and Mix, which is neat, where you iterate and improve to your perfect smoothie. It's the only business that I know of that actually can get you to a perfect smoothie for you. And all the app is like you're just adjusting the ingredients every week.
Right.
The kid at WEquil school brings over your smoothie, and then you try it, and you have to be a member to get it because for safety reasons. But once you have your perfect smoothie, like you're not going to want to go anywhere else. Yeah. It's like, no, I worked for this. I found it. 4 strawberries.
Yeah. 4.5 strawberries. We're down to the half strawberry level.
The half strawberry.
Yeah.
So we put this out there, and then the head of Google's app development division, Tim Sneath, found it and started pumping her school on Twitter.
Awesome.
That was about 5 months ago. And then she became the world's youngest Flutterista. It's like a group of Flutter developer women around the world. And so that was when I started to get really focused on this, and like the next day I was like, okay, I'm just going to leave my job and help my daughter with this. This is powerful. This is important. We started going through the history of K through 12 education, and then that's when it hit me, where people have been learning by doing, and kids have been teaching kids for 2 million years, right. And longer. Just depends on where you would call the break from monkey to human. But this is the way that people learn very naturally, learning by doing.
Yeah.
And so, but like, how do you take learning by doing and then turn that into credentials and be able to signal to colleges? And maybe Michael can speak to this a little bit, because we've had a lot of discussions about it. We have a rather unique idea of, because so much of what they're doing is published, because they're going up on demo day and speaking to it and demonstrating competence, that we can link that to a certification. And even if we're not accredited, that's no longer a piece of paper. That's a piece of paper with a link to live demonstrations and a published body of work of what the kids have been doing relating to that particular skill set. So I maybe
Well,
we can let Michael, or
in the
go
K
ahead.
through 12 world, don't you have, you can just do homeschooling, right? Can't you just have the students all register as homeschooled, and then it pretty much, you can pretty much do whatever you want for the homeschooling, right? So I mean, and then don't they get a certificate of graduation of homeschool?
Uh,
Or I don't know that much about it,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. So the amount of flexibility that homeschoolers get is a little bit frightening.
yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it's a lot of the religious people drove it, I think. That's why it's so wide open.
it is so wide. The amount of information that we had to provide regarding our curriculum could fit into 5 sentences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean,
Uh,
so for you, I don't think for K through 12, it's like, thank God there's actual freedom there, and it's great, and it enables doing exactly what you're doing. In terms of applying to college, I mean, they probably love to, Stanford's going to accept your daughter to college. Like they're going to accept her because they're going to love that story. And as long as I'm sure she's very smart and very hardworking. Between now and when she's 18 years old, she'll, distinguish herself in other ways too. So I mean, and she might have to take the SATs or something, but a smart person who's like a self-starter like that can study for the SATs in an SAT prep course, and in 3 months can get a whatever a perfect score these days on an SAT is. So I mean, I don't think there's that much. The great thing actually is that there isn't much stopping people at the K through 12 level from doing innovation like you're doing, which is great. The
hmm.
college level is more horrific in the sense that it is one catch 22 after another. Literally on the state licensing website for California for licensing a new college, it says in order to be licensed you must be accredited, and then on the accreditor website it says in order to be accredited you must be licensed. It's just bananas. It's just totally bananas. And if you talk to anyone about it who's involved, they think that you're crazy. They gaslight you. They're like, you're crazy and irresponsible for thinking that the system we have doesn't work perfectly. That's what they do every time. It's very strange. And very Kafkaesque. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you bring up a good point. It's the credentialing agencies, and we talked a little bit about this, Joe. I think before in our other conversations, are do have a lock on this, like a regulatory licensure aspects of higher ed. I don't know if it's actually as regulatory. For some schools and programs, it is definitely very structured and controlled and regulated all the way up to the state level to say that you're a qualified school to provide training in X, which is probably really good for doctors and people in healthcare, right? On that side of it. But the broader liberal arts side of it, that's kind of replicated into that. However, what you're talking about before is kind of jumping over those hoops, and why I wanted maybe you talking is like a different method of learning. Will those students start to be looking for different types of school? Yes, you could get into Stanford, but why pay all that money when you think there's good education here? So I think the two sides of that are schools have their process to take a student, say they were Stanford's, and it's a great story. You prove looks like you can learn, but the competition of proving your ability to learn, which I like, Joe, that you mentioned. If you have actual work, can you trace that back to digitized skill sets that have been validated in some way? Not doesn't need to be credentialed by a formal credentialing, but there's some type of system that says, oh, I looked at this work and it's good for learning, higher education environment, or whatever environment that is. Or really the end, to jump over it all is the employers to say, yeah, you have the skills we need. You've already gotten it here. You could go get it at the school, but we're going to accept it. And that kind of breaks down some of those barriers. So out of that long diatribe of how I'm looking at it, how do you think this is, like, if you have schools at the secondary level and primary level that are doing a different model, and then building out schools where they have an option to go to that's probably a better fit for them, and in the end the employers are driven to they really want to go to them as much as they want to go to Stanford to get people, right? Is that part of how you overcome it? What I was going with my question is not how to do it, to Joe, but these relationships that could be set up that are really proving that there is a different type of learning, that there's a whole population of potential students that have an environment that they can learn just as well, maybe at a better price, faster, and employers in the back end said, these are really good students and high quality potential people adding value, not just the employers, but they're adding value to society, starting their own businesses, doing their own things. Like, can that ecosystem be set up? And then that's the workaround.
What you're talking about especially reminds me of this TED talk, which I'll share in the link, which was an example where this guy put this computer just like out into an Indian street, and like Indian children just came up and like tried to figure it all out, and it was in English. They didn't even know English, and then after like 2 years he came back and all the kids knew how to use like computers because they had this computer that they could like lay hands on or whatever, which is super powerful. And I completely agree. You know, what you're describing is like a really pure form of, I think, the Montessori philosophy, which is that like the child themselves, like the child itself, it sounds like a machine. The child has
the
this
machine
mind.
children themselves.
The robot children, their minds are these like learning machines. They engage with the world through learning. That's what they do. That's like the human way to engage with the world. And people who are amazed by that, I just say, well, I have 2 cats. I say, look at cats. They're way dumber than humans. And my cats explore my house completely. They know every single nook and cranny because they're curious. Curiosity killed the cat. Human beings are 1,000 times more curious and 1,000 times smarter than cats. But it's the same principle. They get into every single little nook and cranny of anything they can, encounter and play around with. So I totally believe in that form of education. In terms of how you get that person into a traditional college, I think that's pretty clear, pretty easy. You just do homeschooling and you take the SATs or whatever. That's great. So that means that possibility is wide open for people to do. How do you get them into an alternative college?
So we can cancel our podcast, Michael. We're just gonna keep having these kids make money and launch, and higher credentials. Bada bing.
Yeah.
So that
they may want to go to college for the
we're all
college
clearly in the party here. We all drank the Kool-Aid, but like pretty much every single parent that we had, so we had a ton of kids that were coming in and out of our house because Sume's learning community basically turned into like a little hub during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Where all the parents were too busy working, especially in our area. This is like one of the best public education systems on paper in the world.
Right.
Nobody goes to Falls Church, Virginia to homeschool. And so like during the pandemic, all these kids, they had no choice. They're coming in, they're doing all this stuff, they're loving it, and they're drinking the Kool-Aid of, oh yeah, we should actually be building our unique strengths. We should be paying attention to our interests and channeling them to create value for people. Oh, that's how the real world works. You create valuable things for people, and if I publish things, then people will find me, and I'm building my resume. And then guess what? They all went back to school.
And they hated that now.
They all went back to school, and now, like, some of them are frustrated with. Some of the parents are frustrated because some of the kids are like, "I really like WEquil school,"
Yeah. What you're talking about is the difference between compulsory and non-compulsory learning. Mm-hmm. The 2 books I just shared are like the 2 most famous books on this topic. But one's called How to Learn, How Children Learn by John Holt, and the other one's called Dumbing Us Down, which is about. Anyways, the point is, John Holt really describes it the best. He says, when you're in a compulsory learning environment, a child in a compulsory learning environment uses most of their brain power to figure out how little work they can do. But if you're in a non-compulsory learning environment, they use 100% of their brain to learn because they're not trying to figure out how to dodge and duck and weave and like do as little possible work as they possibly can. So you
described my son, by the way, my oldest son.
Anyone in a compulsory working environment, that's what you do. It's natural. It's the natural game dynamics of a compulsory learning. It's the same way as if you were a POW at a work camp, you would be trying to do as little work as you possibly could. You're being forced to work.
So let's be clear. Adam just compared the public education system, K through 12, to
Absolutely. Without any
no,
compunction at all.
I'm not completely disagreeing with you. I mean, I there are definitely parallels there, and it's like that was the shocking part. It was almost frustrating to me to see how much my kids were learning during the first month when they weren't being told what to do. But that made me think back on like, well, how much did they miss out on? But you're being very generous, keeping the attention on me. I really want to hear more about in the college space. What do you see as like the biggest? So you mentioned one big problem, which is the fact that it's very hard for new colleges to move into that space. But like, what are some other huge pain points that are stopping human progress in the space of higher ed?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing is this accreditation piece. But that is sort of like that's the first bottleneck. But because of that, all the other things that we could be doing can't be done. So I'll give you an example. I'm working with a gentleman named Chris Patel, really smart guy, awesome guy. He's a professor at Babson College. He works in their entrepreneurship MBA program. Okay, so this is Babson MBA professor in entrepreneurship. I mean, Babson entrepreneurship, they're the best. I mean, they're the school, right? And he was brought in to innovate on this program. That was his stated role, was to like make cool new educational opportunities. And he wants to make what any of us, I mean, in a way, it's a kind of obvious thing, but it's exactly the right thing, which is a project-based MBA in entrepreneurship, where guess what you do? You start companies, and then you learn how to start companies by starting companies. Okay, he cannot do this. Babson says, you cannot do this. You cannot start this program. You cannot do it that way. You cannot do this. He has decks. He's been working there 2 years. He has plans. He has everybody trusts him. Everybody loves him. The college loves him. The muckety mucks love him. Everybody loves him. Can't do it. It's not possible because you can't accredit a program because it's unaccreditable. No accreditor will accredit his program. And if they did accredit the program separately,
I still don't understand why they won't accredit the program.
They just won't do it.
You have to go through the credit.
These are organizations that have not changed for 60 years, and they have no intention of changing now. Even though they pay lip service to change, they pay lip service all the time. Oh, we want to innovate. Oh, we want new programs. Oh, that's all top of the funnel lip service. As soon as you go down 2-3 steps, it's everything you're doing, we can't do it. You're not assessing properly. You're not whatever. You don't have enough seat time hours, which is like, I don't even want to do seat time hours. They're like, oh, well, we can't even talk. We can't even begin to talk. So yeah, the accreditation acts as a poison pill.
So if that's the case, so let's take the logic then of what's going on here with K through 12 and see if we can extrapolate this. Within WEquil Group, we launched from having 1 employee 6 months ago to now there's 20 on the payroll. And I don't see resumes from anybody. Like not a single resume has been read for anybody that's applied. There's probably been about 100 applications, give or take. Everybody that I've hired has been someone who demonstrated the ability to add value to WEquil Group. And that's Vishal included. And he's our COO of all of WEquil Group. The guy's incredible. Vishal, maybe you could like mention for a second, like what was your interview process and how often did I bring up like, I don't even know, did you go to college?
Yeah, so
yes, he went to USC.
Yeah, I went to USC, but I think this is the first time I'm mentioning it to you.
I've never heard of you going to. Did Rishi go to college?
Yeah, he went to Boston University.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, this is, and we've been talking every day for almost 2 months now, but none of that was really important. This was essentially the process of how we got introduced to WEquil Group. Was Joe used to run what is now WEquil Capital, the financial services branch of WEquil Group, was Intuit Econ on Twitter, where he'd post publications about finance, investing, things like that. And so he had just mentioned on Twitter that, you know, anyone that wants to write an article about some of the topics that we're studying, you know, can write an article and we can have that published on the Intuit Econ website. So my brother did that. He wrote an article, sent it to Joe. Before he ever even knew Joe's name, he knew him as Bernard Baruch, which was a pseudonym. Sent him an article. Joe read it. He was, you know, my brother was the first person to demonstrate proof of work, to show interest and to show the ability to provide value work. And so Joe got him onto a podcast. And so that was the first time, you know, we'd ever seen each other face to face. Hired my brother right on the spot, right after the podcast. And then a couple weeks later, he had me on the podcast as well, which is kind of an impromptu thing. I joined in midway on the podcast, and hired me as well. And that was it. There was no mention of any resumes, no talking about what we've done in the past. It was all about what we're contributing right now, what kind of value we can provide, and that was it. And it's been working really well. So I think more and more things are going to move that way.
The cost of demonstration. So colleges do two things, right? Historically, correct me if I'm wrong. Like clearly, Michael, Adam, you guys are experts on this. I got drug into this because my daughter, like, you know, she just woke up one morning and she had like twice as many Twitter followers as she did the day before, which wasn't a lot, but it was like, what's going on? So like my life and focus just changed, right? So you guys are the experts, but here's how I see it. And I've managed a lot of teams over my career. And so I have a lot of experience in terms of interviews and things, but all that colleges really exist to do are help people develop skills that can be defined very broadly, right? That can also be like learning about what you enjoy and building relationships. I put that all in the funnel of human capital, and then signaling value to employers, right? And potential spouses, that too, but basically technology has made the cost of both of those drop to almost zero. So you can learn almost anything now for free, and you can signal value in very little time at all. The effort required to demonstrate that you have competence in certain areas and can add value to a company, entity, community, DAO, whatever, is also extremely cheap. So help me understand why the focus on credentials and accreditation at all.
Yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead, Michael.
I would say I think this has been mentioned twice, or I probably said this in my head while you're talking, as I do, is risk. So parents don't want to take the risk, like even in, falls at best school. Why would I take a risk to go do this, an unproven thing, to do that? And then on the other side of that, employers, they worry about risk. Not all, and I think that's what you're looking at. Where is your market share? I say that in the sense of people that believe in this and are less risk averse to jump in, because credentials take out the risk. It's almost like an insurance to say, what I get, whether that's this school, accreditation does this, they check it, so you can give credits, they accredit that, and employers do the same thing to eliminate risk. So how do you circumvent that? You need to find the population that is more risk averse and start proving the model. Are you ever going to overcome the entire wave of these two things? No, but is there enough people? And so I shared a link to a Power BI dashboard that I built for Virginia that looked at the region's socioeconomic difference and college going rates. And when you do look at it, you'll see there's a clear band of dark green that shows socioeconomic and college going rates. You can slide it around. You'll see it's very clear in this outlier lower graph that, the number one outlier school that sits up there, that is Falls Church, right? They're Little Falls Church City. So you're dealing with people that are way out. Why break the system? Now, if you look at the other side of the state and start going into the rural, so are there populations of people there that are willing to take this risk and want to get access to the employer? So you kind of need it at both ends of the funnel. Families and people are willing to take the risk, and then the employers that understand whether it's a supply and demand issue, they'll take the risk to kind of overcome it. That would be my take on it, because you're never going to get rid of that credentialing piece for a while. It's finding enough people that like, this actually works.
Yeah, and we talked about this too in terms of level versus rate of change, where I see a bear market in credentialism, at least that form of it, where it's just a piece of paper, not one linked to a YouTube video where you see a student demonstrating for an hour and given their oral defense backed by their body of work in front of a committee, and then having that committee, a group of people, including folks that specialize in various fields, kind of, pushing them and challenging them, and that's what gives it value, that's verifiable on demand. Like I see something like that in terms of credentials being really powerful, but it's obviously the level is very high in terms of the demand for credentials, but the direction, the rate of change, I think, is falling. I think it'd be really, really hard to argue otherwise. Even just during the pandemic, you had a lot, especially the FANG companies, but across, particularly in software, because it's so easy to demonstrate. Like with Sume, she built out this Flutter class, and she's got students that are building apps and launching companies. So that is clearly something that's easy to demonstrate. Harder to do that with something like, say, psychology, and having someone provide counseling services. Like, how are you supposed to live stream that, right? So there's clearly things that this isn't going to work out for immediately, but the direction is clear in my mind. Is that fair?
So yeah, it is fair. And
You can disagree with me. You can please do push back.
No, because what you're saying is completely fair, but I want to just pull out like an assumption that I think we have to be careful about, because it's not actually held by a lot of people, or maybe it's held by a lot of people. But the assumption, for example, that systems and the world and like things get better over time, if that is true, then yes, it would be fair that like the system of education would be getting better over time. Unfortunately, that is false in the system of education. At least the system of education does not just like cell phone speed and battery life just get better over time, or like the amount of solar adoption. It's going to increase and increase and increase, right? That is not the case for education. There is not progress in education. There's either standstill or regress. Fewer and fewer people are getting educated at a worse and worse quality of education every year.
Okay, so
that's pretty clear to me, at least. I don't know if that's
so. Let's try to define terms here. So just in terms of education, you're very focused on looking at the statistics associated with higher ed, right?
Yeah, I mean,
in general,
I guess I'm just saying, like, you're right to have the right attitude. Like, wouldn't it be great if education was getting better and better? But it's actually not. It's not getting better and better. So, but when
you say that, I just want to make sure I understand what you mean. But I want to know when you say that, like, so you can define education in so many ways. Like, you could define the computer being rolled out into the middle of some street in India as education. So I just want to be clear that what you're talking about are statistics associated with higher ed credentialed, universities and colleges. You're speaking to that when you say the word education, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's not wrong. I just want to make sure I understand what you mean.
It's kind of the highest reaches. Yeah, that's kind of, well, I mean, because I don't mean how much people learn. I think people are learning.
See, that's the way I think. When I think of education, that's why I'm asking you to define terms. Like, we're not going to play a semantics game. We're not going to argue about it. I just want to make sure I understand what you mean, because when I hear the word education, I mean, how much are people learning? But when you say what you say, given your background, I assume that you are defining education as the statistics that are verifiable associated with higher education, colleges, universities.
Yeah, I can clarify what I mean. I mean, if we can abstract in our minds for a second, what people learn as one kind of delta, and the other is like what schools accelerate people's learning or make them learn more faster. The first one is increasing because of the internet and because privileged, smart people with enough time and energy are curious and learn things and invent things. So learning is going up faster, largely because of the internet, I think, and access to, data and resources and books and everything. And obviously economic growth in India and China. There's a lot more people who would have not been literate who are literate. I mean, there's a lot more learning going on. But the actual pace, the actual ability of schools and teachers to increase that learning, I don't think has improved in probably 100 years.
Okay, great. So we're totally on the same page, and I'm definitely not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to define terms. Right. So totally get that. Totally appreciate that. I think I'm in complete agreement with you. I'm in complete agreement. I had an argument with a teacher who's also a family member about Common Core.
Mm.
And she was explaining to me about how Common Core is so different than what it was before, because we're not using A, B, C, D anymore. We're using 1, 2, 3, 4 grades. And that changes everything now, because it's not letter grades now, it's numbers. I was like, what? It's like Sumi and I were having this debate, and then she had like a 2 hour long debate with her. It was like I just caught the tail end of it. But basically for 2 hours, Sume is arguing with this family member teacher about the nature of learning. And Sume, she's very patient. She's not like me. So Michael and I, we're both like the ENTP types. So we have the debater personality. So you have to watch it and be careful. We kind of enjoy it. Sume is not like that at all. She's way too focused on actually trying to help all these kids. So for her to take 2 hours to have a discussion with a public school teacher about like how kids learn and repeat herself for 2 hours, like that's it took a lot out of her. But she just kept saying the same thing over and over again, which was kids learn better when they're actually doing stuff, when they're actually applying their learning and trying to use knowledge.
Yeah, when you think about education and why it's structured the way it is, at the time, it was about scaling. It's about delivering education at all levels across an entire, and Germany was one of the first ones that figured out and structured it. That's what the American model is built off the German model. But that's been kind of where I do think you're right, is what that's been broken apart a little bit there, is that people actually, and they see this work at different speeds and can learn at different speeds. There is a lot of science behind people's brain development and how the different stages you have different abilities, but it doesn't really work well. And I think of Sume even, where she's like, oh, I could get done with all this stuff in, like 2 years in one, what would be usually just a term, right? You can go very quickly. And I think that's where higher education, or, secondary and even higher education struggles with varying speeds, and people wanted to go through fast. We're very used, and that's why actually the credentialing in higher education, they have a hard time. Like we have to take students in for freshmen and sophomore and juniors and seniors, and they go early or they come in late. That we can't do that. Our systems aren't built for that. How do we prove any of that?
I think it's just too complicated. So we talk a lot at WEquil Capital about the new personalized economy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an incredibly powerful idea, and it's flowing into so much of what we're doing on the investing front that it's hard for me to not see applications of what's happening. So the Industrial Revolution, by its nature, was one that really drove people to buy a lot of the same products, especially like you take the Model T, and Henry Ford famously said, you can have whatever color you want as long as it's black, right? People were generally making their own goods for the household, and those were personalized. You could go to the local blacksmith and get whatever you wanted personalized to you, and that's fine. But as soon as you could make things at scale, you're going to buy that knife from the factory that's nearby. And if it's not the knife you like, too bad, right? Because you can't just like change out the factory for you, right? So you had this huge ramp up in personalization, or ramp down in personalization during the Industrial Revolution. But as technology has progressed, you've had a movement toward personalizing products and services that was slow. I'd say it pretty much stayed really high all the way up through the end of World War II, and was rather imperceptible until broadcast media and the movement of news stations, such that you didn't only have like 3 different ways to get your news. And some of the fact that you could personalize where you get your information about reality has had some maybe not so great implications. But that was kind of the beginning of personalization, is that you could decide what reality you wanted to live in your own head. But then you had the software revolution. And the software revolution is causing personalization to occur on essentially all fronts. You have companies like Etsy, where you have individuals that are creating individualized products that they're creating and selling. Amazon really pushing, driving down the cost of being able to sell goods to individuals that appreciate what you're creating, right? So you don't have to go to a store to buy that thing. That also requires economies of scale, reliance on like a Walmart, for example. And then now you have 3D printing driving personalization in manufacturing. You have genomics companies, like Invitae is a company that provides like the best in class, cheapest solution for genome sequencing that you can personalize your healthcare with. We did a whole personalization demo day a couple weeks ago where the kids were talking about this, and then the investors were talking about this, and then our entrepreneurs were talking about this. It was really cool. A really powerful idea, right? Totally goes against the grain of everything we've been doing with education for 100 years. All of it. If you want to differentiate yourself as an individual in the workforce, and actually like basic econ 101, don't be a commodity. Don't be a commodity. How many MBAs do we pump out every single year? You're an interchangeable part. You're going to be another lawyer, just like another lawyer that's doing another lawyer thing. Might as well be on the factory floor. So it's like the whole idea of education, I think, needs to change in a way that allows for individuals to harness who they are and signal that in the world in a way that makes them irreplaceable. That's education. Not the way most people think, but that's the way I see the future.
I think a lot of this conversation is analogous to the conversation that happens in tech around healthcare. So I used to work at Epic Systems, the corporation, the software that's the leading electronic medical record company in the world, or the country, I guess, not the world, but in the country. Everyone, Stanford, Kaiser Permanente, everybody's on Epic. And during that time that I worked there and after, I've tracked like Sergey Brin and Larry Page. I mean, the only time I've ever seen Larry Page like in a video just melt down. Usually he's so, just like, oh, we'll just use reason and technology and we'll solve problems, but he just lost his shit talking about how healthcare records are idiotic, right? He just completely lost it because Google has been wanting to crack in and like make healthcare records better through simple, obvious things, super obvious things, but they cannot do it. They cannot do it. They've tried and failed for more than a decade of trying to do this. And so it's the only thing that really gets Larry Page's goat is how stupid this is, the healthcare records. Okay, I would say that education is the same. It's the same. It will make you, it's like when you're having sex with a 900-pound gorilla, you don't get to decide when it's over. The education system is
that really depends
bigger and badder and worse.
I don't know how many gorillas you've had sex with.
That's what one of my mentors used to say. He's an Epic consultant guy, a business guy, but
you're making it tough. You're also making it tough on Vishal here because this is going to the WEquil School YouTube channel.
I'm gonna keep cussing and swearing. And
Vishal's going back in here and be like,
it's an adults only channel.
Yeah. No, it's a grotesque analogy.
Dude, you just be you.
I just think it's important for us to realize, education seems like there's a couple of things about it. One thing is everyone thinks they know how to do education. It's like design and education. Everyone thinks they know how to do it, right? and they don't, because they're not trained educators, not trained designers. They don't, but everyone thinks they do. It's not like heart surgery. No one walks up to a heart surgeon in a party and is like, well, I'll tell you how to do heart surgery, but if you talk to someone at a party who's a teacher all day long, people just tell you how to do education. They're like, oh, I know how to do it, let me tell you how to do it. So that's one part of education that's very strange, is people who don't know how to do it thinking they know how to do it. But the other part that's weird that people don't realize is that just higher education, not even K through 12, but just higher education is a $400 billion market. That's the same as cars. So when people talk about like, oh, we should like change that, we should like disrupt it and innovate it, it's like, good luck, like it's going to be as hard or harder.
That was good. Yeah.
But think about
I
this.
can feel it. I felt that one, Adam. Yeah.
No, that was natural.
Oh yeah.
So what if you just named a couple different, healthcare. I was going to use, when you're using about examples of, Amazon, what you can do. The one place you can't do that is alcohol, because it's highly regulated because of risk, right? It goes back to risk. People feel there's too much risk of your future if you go down this path. If you eliminate that risk, and there's things that, there was forcing things that cause people to say, oh, actually, you can do it. So yeah, actually higher education costs more than a car. But, you're getting a car if you find out, oh, I don't need a car to get there.
The cost is so much more, right? A car,
yeah.
Oh my God, so expensive compared
to
that
actual pressure of, there's a lot of, I don't think we have time to get into. It's the cost and the loans, and that's a lot of work that I've been doing with my current company on this overall debt load within education. And you start to realize it costs less. You could still get to the employer and the job without this level of cost. Yeah. Now that's where I set that map of Virginia. There are millions and billions of people out there that need a lower cost way to get to education. You prove that to the employers, and then you have your market. You have people that want to do it.
So just to be clear, I love this conversation right now, and I am not going anywhere. Like, I will outlast you. You guys are gonna have to be like, are we still going?
No, I have a 2:00 hard stop. I gotta go, but
yeah. You gotta go. You're in California?
There's one other thing I'll leave you with, though, that is an element that I think is important to just continue to consider, that people often, especially if you're approaching it from a kind of tech sort of entrepreneurial level, people actually forget that there is a very important element of college, which is the college experience. In our society, we have almost no coming of age rituals. The best people can get, and it's not a very good one, is to go to college.
No, sorry. Okay.
No, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not hard enough.
Not good enough?
So college becomes this coming of age thing. 18-year-olds, it's really good for 18-year-olds and maybe 19-year-olds to go away from their parents' houses, live in co-living situations, have experiences, be able to push boundaries, be able to experiment. It's very valuable. So when you said earlier, Joe, the different things that college does, I would just always add that, because it actually is a really critical piece. It's extremely complex.
I totally agree with that. I think it depends on like how you define human capital. Like, what is human capital? A huge part of human capital is discovering yourself. It's building personal relationships. Yeah. It's so much more. You can't really detract that from knowledge, especially since knowledge is so freely available on demand with Google, that frankly these other forms of knowledge or these other parts of human capital are increasingly more important within that pie. But you said you have a hard stop. Let me just leave you with this.
Sure. I want to post something quick before he has to leave, and that is next week is a Future of Higher Education happy hour. So that might be a good place to get some more ideas around. They'll put out a call for topics of people to manage and talk about things. Yeah, I think it's next week, next Wednesday.
Is there an invite for that? How do you get that? I want to get that on my calendar. How do I get that on my calendar?
He sent it out, I thought. Grant
we will do it, and we will be there. But
then it continues the conversation.
Oh, I love this. But the other thing too is like popping into a chat with you, Adam, and being able to bounce these ideas off Michael. No, I loved it. Like, this is like This is so great. It kind of
I feel
reminds
like
me
I'm
of
going a
like
little bit too
like
hard.
some of
Sorry.
some of my favorite Joe Rogan podcasts. Like this felt like that, but like way more useful, as opposed to just talking to Mike Tyson
Well,
about
definitely track what I'm doing with Elton, because Elton is basically I was kind of where you guys are sort of thinking right now, like from the outside. That's where I was like 7 years ago. I was like, let's just do the things. It's obvious, and it is obvious. But then when you actually get into the nitty gritty details, a lot of things kind of shake out, and I've kind of ended up like, okay, Elton, that's the like actual like logical conclusion of that urge to fix education. I think Elton is the kind of logical conclusion. So definitely keep track. I'm going to update the website in the next week or two, and it's going to be the real vision of the future of kind of how it's going to work. And
Dude, I want to showcase you. I want to showcase you in front of our entire school. I want to do it at your
oh well,
leisure.
don't do it yet. Don't do it yet.
Let me know
Yeah,
when.
yeah. Well, let's do it. Oh, I really would appreciate that. I think that'd be awesome because I think it is kind of a good college that is in line with what it sounds like this kind of education that your daughter and her colleagues are doing. So yeah, let's totally do that and see and get their feedback. I mean, I want to reach out to them as
That's
co-creators
right.
more
That's
than
what
just
the
like
kids do at
consumers.
the
Yeah,
school. That's how they're
that's what
learning.
I want. That's what I want.
They
That's
do a
what we want. That's
project,
what Elton's all
we
about.
call it minimum viable project, iterate and improve,
Yep.
socialize with the school,
Yep.
and then grow the seed. I
Excellent.
want to do that, man. Let's
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
We
Let's
ended
do
with
it.
a
Let's
common
do it.
language.
That's
I
what we're
knew
gonna
it was
do.
going to be there.
All right. Hey, Michael, can you stick
All
around for a
right. Take
second?
care, guys. I gotta
Yeah.
go.
All
All
right.
right. See ya.
Take care. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Don't go yet.
Okay.
This is so much fun, man. Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I love that guy.
Yeah. I knew you would like, talk to a couple of people and like, oh, they think very similarly.
Oh, man, you're so good. I'm so glad you called me. Ah, great. Vishal, you don't know this, but like I met Michael in the park and I felt like it was magic. Sume guessed his after 4 questions knew his personality type. She's like, "You're basically my dad, aren't you?" And he's like, "Yeah." So how'd you do that? And then he talked about Myers-Briggs for half an hour, and then he didn't call me back. And I kept sending him texts, and then he was moving.
We were moving. We moved. It was stressful.
Yeah.
Very
You know how
stressful.
hard it is to do that? I've been really
Yeah.
busy. We're trying to launch a DAO, launching a hedge fund, startup incubator. School grew by about 400%.
Yeah, what
I
are we
kept
up to?
texting you. I kept texting you. But I feel like okay, this was way more natural and way more fun than trying to schedule meetings. Like I don't want to do that. Like I feel like the best way to move forward with what we're doing is that when people are available and they want to pop in, especially since you're an ENTP, I know you just kind of go with the flow. You just ride. Like you're available, we pop in here with a Zoom call. Vishal comes in here, we come in with this podcast. Like we just start pumping these things out. This is the way that this is going to work, and it's going to be way more fun, hassle free. But I've been talking to more parents about these 5 pillars, and they love it. There's a common language
Yeah.
with that I didn't realize this. Maybe I should have, but parents have been talking for a long time, I guess, about the fact that, well, why aren't my kids learning practical things like how to do taxes and how money works, right?
Mhm.
And they've been talking for a long time about emotional intelligence, about the know yourself, know how to build relationships with people. How do you use social media correctly and understand things like using data, the power and influence of machine learning and directing who you're supposed to be friends with, the dangers of some of the technology. Like these are the things that parents are worried about and excited about.
Yes. So one thing I didn't bring up because I'm talking to Adam before, and I'd mentioned on another one of the other discussions is Credentialing and the work that we're doing with them. And actually, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this app, an application we developed with Kale. Do you know Kale? What is it? What do they
My
stand
wife
for?
makes great kale.
Anyway,
She's
the bottom
stir-fried
line
cabbage.
is a lot of it is underlying and there's been a lot of discussions about this in higher education, but in education in general, of unbundling. And what that means is these degrees, and when it comes to credentialing, these degrees are very well, very structured of these classes, these learning objectives, and all these things. And you've got to go in this progressive process in order to build on to get to this point, to get your credential at the end. But so many people, the number of people that stop out and don't graduate are very high. And why are they leaving with nothing? Like, they're leaving with skills, and that ideally they come back later on if they didn't feel like they completely failed. So is it not about unbundling it and saying you're putting together building blocks of skills, right? That usually you're unbundling a degree. But when you look at that even deeper, and we're doing a little bit of work with this, is do you start looking at those skill sets and structure of it, both in structured education learning, workforce learning, and kind of life learning? All those just need to talk to one another. And like you said, be validated and credentialed to say. So Credentialing is actually looking at building it has to be electronic and transferable, right? What are they? CTLD, I forget that stands for.
So is this what you're actively working on at your startup that's 15 years old?
Yeah, I know. That's why I threw that out there, because if I put it out there, we'll see the bench point, because they did all this contract work, DoD. We've just started developing apps and trying to launch apps and kind of working in this space. That's why I would say we're kind of and we have an agile startup kind of feel. But I thought I brought up Credentialing before.
Okay. So I want to keep chatting with you, but I also want to make sure that I'm cognizant of Vishal's time.
Yeah, and I gotta jump. So I'm gonna send this. So you have this in the link.
That
here.
sounds good. Maybe we could just say a quick goodbye for the recording. That was
Okay.
awesome. Michael, thank you so much for getting me into the group. And I wrote my first intro welcome to that in about 5 seconds.
That's why I was like, go back and do that. You need to, you'll get.
I know, and you're very patient with me, and thank you.
And people, there wasn't as much response because they went out. A bunch of them were out. The people that usually respond, they all went to Denver for this big.
I have no idea who responded to my thing. I never bothered to go back and look, and I totally should just redo my welcome, because wow, I really want to meet those people. It's just been crazy. So thank you, and I want to talk to you about how because you and I just work together really, really well. It's so easy. It's like breathing. like Austin. So Austin's really great at actually leading and building this stuff out and bringing the community along with this. But in terms of showing up on a podcast and just hashing this stuff out, it's just so beautiful, and I love it. So I appreciate that, and thank you, Vishal. You're incredible. I mean, 2 months, and what you didn't mention is that during that 2 months, you went from me not knowing you at all to operationalizing all of WEquil Group. You're amazing.
Thank you.
I don't know what I'd do without you. You help me sleep better. And
that's what I'm here for.
And I didn't even know you went to college until today. So
Yeah.
Thank you. And so feel free to end the recording, and then we can just chat briefly, and then we can go.
All right.
Okay.
That's good. I'm going to end it right now.